The stage is set. Let's tell tonight's story. I'd like to invite you into an empty theatre. The audience has long since gone home. The applause has faded into memory, and the stage is lit only by the soft glow of a single work light. Rows of empty seats disappear into the darkness, while somewhere backstage, ropes gently sway with the movement of the old building settling for the night. If you've ever worked in a theatre, you'll know that they have a personality all of their own. Every theatre creaks. Every theatre has its own sounds. Some seem to sigh as the heating pipes cool after a performance. Others whisper with the gentle movement of scenery suspended high above the stage. To an outsider, they're simply old buildings. To the people who spend their lives inside them, almost alive. And with buildings that have witnessed thousands of performances over hundreds of years, stories are inevitable. Some are funny. Some are tragic. Some have become traditions that are passed from one generation of performers to the next, without anyone really knowing where they began. This story is perhaps the most famous theatre legend of them all. It is a story that has survived more than 4 centuries. A story whispered backstage in schools, community theatres, touring companies, and some of the world's greatest playhouses. It is the story of the play that many actors refuse to name. Even today, countless performers will avoid saying its title while standing inside a theatre. Instead, they give it another name: the Scottish play. To anyone unfamiliar with theatre, this might sound rather strange. After all, it's simply the title of a Shakespeare play. Why would saying the name cause concern? Why would experienced actors, stage managers, directors and technicians, people who are otherwise practical and rational, go to such lengths to avoid a single word? The answer depends entirely on who you ask. Some believe it's merely tradition. Others insist it's a superstition that brings theatre people together. But there are still many who quietly admit that they've seen enough unexplained coincidences to avoid tempting fate. Whether they truly believe in the curse or not almost doesn't matter anymore. The tradition has become part of theatre itself, and like many old traditions, its origins are wrapped in mystery. The story begins over 400 years ago. England was entering its 17th century. Theatres were unlike the comfortable venues we know today. Many performances took place outside. Audience stood shoulder to shoulder. Special effects relied on clever mechanics, smoke, candles, ropes, trapdoors, and the remarkable ingenuity of stage craftsmen. There were no computers, no automated scenery. Everything depended upon timing, teamwork, and trust. The man at the centre of our story was already becoming one of England's greatest playwrights, William Shakespeare. Even centuries after his death, his name is recognised across the world. His plays have been translated into countless languages. They've inspired films, operas, novels, and modern retellings that continue to appear today. Yet among all of Shakespeare's works, comedies, romances, histories, and tragedies, one stands apart. Not because it is necessarily his greatest, but because of the strange reputation it has gathered over generations. Macbeth, the tragedy, tells the story of a brave Scottish general whose ambition slowly consumes him. Encouraged by mysterious witches and driven by the ruthless determination of Lady Macbeth, he murders his king in pursuit of the Scottish throne. Power brings fear. Fear brings violence. Violence leads only to ruin. It is one of Shakespeare's darkest plays, filled with betrayal, murder, guilt, and the supernatural. The witches appear almost immediately. They speak in strange riddles. They predict the future. They tempt Macbeth with promises of greatness, while never quite telling him the whole truth. For audiences in Shakespeare's day, witches were not simply characters from fairy tales. Many people genuinely believed they existed. Across Europe, thousands of people have been accused of witchcraft. Some were imprisoned. Many were executed. Fear of magic, curses, and supernatural forces was very real. King James I himself had written extensively about witchcraft and demons. He believed witches posed a genuine threat. When Shakespeare began writing Macbeth, he knew these themes would capture the imagination of audiences. Some historians believe he even tailored the play to appeal directly to King James, whose Scottish heritage made the story particularly relevant. But according to theatre legend, Shakespeare did something extraordinary, or perhaps something terribly dangerous. The story claims that the chants spoken by the three witches were not entirely invented. Instead, Shakespeare is said to have copied real incantations, real rituals, real words believed to have been used by practicing witches. No historical evidence has ever proven this. Most scholars believe it is simply another myth. But legends rarely require proof. They require only enough mystery for people to wonder, what if? According to the tale, the witches were furious that their sacred words had been stolen and placed before paying audiences. In revenge, they cursed the play itself. Not the actors, not the audience, the play. From that moment onward, anyone who performed it would risk becoming part of the curse. At first, perhaps no one noticed. Productions came and went. Actors learned their lines. Audiences applauded. Life continued. But then, stories began to appear. An actor injured here, a theatre fire there, unexpected illness, broken scenery, strange accidents that seemed to happen more often than anyone thought they should. Were they simply coincidences? Or had something else taken root within the walls of the theatre? No one could say for certain. Yet, every new mishap added another thread to the growing legend. And slowly, almost without anyone noticing, the reputation of Macbeth began to change. It was no longer simply a Shakespeare tragedy. It had become the Scottish play. The first thing to understand about old theatre legends is that they rarely begin with certainty. Instead, they begin with whispers. The first thing to understand about old theatre legends is that they rarely begin with certainty. Instead, they begin with whisper. A story told by one actor to another while waiting in the wings. A tale shared by a stage manager during a late night get-out. A warning passed from one generation to the next, until eventually no one can remember who did it first. The legend of Macbeth is no different. For centuries, people have tried to discover exactly when the curse began. Some claim it happened during the very first performance of the play. Others believe it emerged gradually over many decades. The truth is, no one knows. But that has never stopped theatre people from telling the story. One of the oldest legends concerns the play's premiere in the early 17th century. According to the tale, disaster struck before the curtain had even risen. The young actor, playing Lady Macbeth, suddenly became gravely ill. Some versions say he collapsed. Others claim he died without warning. In Shakespeare's time, women were not allowed to perform on stage, so the role of Lady Macbeth would have been played by a young boy or teenage actor. The story says there was no time to find a replacement. The audience had already gathered. The performance had to go ahead. So, with no other option, William Shakespeare himself stepped into the role. It's a dramatic image, isn't it? The playwright, dressed in costume, taking the stage to save his own production. It is certainly memorable. But historians have searched for evidence and none have ever been found. There are no surviving records proving that Shakespeare performed as Lady Macbeth. Most scholars believe the story was created many years later. And even if it never happened, the tale became part of the legend, because that's often how folklore works. If a story feels believable enough, it survives. As the years passed, more stories appeared. A falling piece of scenery, a sword that broke during a fight scene, an actor who missed an entrance, a stagehand injured while moving heavy scenery. None of these incidents would have been unusual on their own. Theatres of the 17th century were busy, noisy, and sometimes dangerous places. Candles lit the stage. Heavy timber scenery was moved entirely by hand. Trapdoors opened beneath actors' feet. Ropes, pulleys, and counterweights stretched high into the darkness above the stage. There was no modern safety harness. No steel-toed shoes. No risk assessment pinned to a notice board. Every performance relied on experience, communication, and trust. Even the smallest mistake could have serious consequences. Perhaps, then, it isn't surprising that accidents happen. What is surprising is the way people began to connect those accidents with a single play. Human beings are remarkable pattern seekers. We notice coincidences. We remember unusual events. If 3 different productions of Macbeth experienced problems, it became easier to believe that there was a connection. Meanwhile, productions of other plays that ran perfectly smoothly were quietly forgotten. Over time, every new mishap seemed to strengthen the legend. Soon, actors began treating the play differently. They lowered their voices when speaking about it backstage. Some avoided saying his name altogether. Not because they were convinced the curse was real, but because it seemed wiser not to take the chance. The habit spread. One theatre company taught another. Experienced actors warned newcomers. Directors smiled as they repeated the tradition. Even those who laughed at the superstition often found themselves following it anyway. After all, what harm could it do? In theatre, traditions have a curious power. Before opening night, some performers wear a lucky charm. Others put on their costume in the same order every time. Some knock on the stage before stepping onto it. Many gather in a circle before the audience enters, sharing words of encouragement. None of these rituals guarantees success, but they create confidence. They remind everyone that theatre is a team effort. The superstition surrounding Macbeth became another of these shared customs. Quiet agreement between generations. Outside the theatre, people might call it nonsense. Inside, it simply became part of the culture. And then there were the witches. Whenever people discussed the curse, they almost always returned to those 3 mysterious figures who appeared in the opening scene. The Weird Sisters, standing on a lonely Scottish heath, speaking in riddles, promising greatness, foretelling tragedy. Their words are among the most recognisable in all of Shakespeare. They never force Macbeth to act. They simply plant a seed. Everything that follows grows from ambition, fear, and choice. Some theatre historians believe this is one of the reasons the play feels so unsettling. Unlike many stories of magic, the witches don't cast obvious spells. Instead, they tempt. They whisper. They allow Macbeth's own imagination to do the rest. Perhaps that makes them even more frightening, and perhaps it explains why audiences have remained fascinated by them for more than 400 years. As each generation discovered the play, they also inherited its growing reputation. A reputation built not only on documented accidents, but on stories. Stories that travelled farther than facts. Stories that became richer each time they were retold. By the 19th century, the legend had become firmly established. Most professional actors knew never to say the title inside a theatre unless they were actively rehearsing or performing the play. Visitors who accidentally spoke the forbidden word were often met with mock horror. Some laughed, some apologized immediately, and some found themselves learning an unusual ritual. One that, according to tradition, could lift the curse before it had the chance to take hold. But that ritual is a story for a little later. Because before we can understand why it exists, first we need to hear about the productions that convinced even some of the greatest actors in history that perhaps, just perhaps, there really was something unusual about the Scottish play. As the centuries passed, the legend of the Scottish play grew stronger. Each generation of actors inherited not only Shakespeare's words, but also the warning that surrounded them. Some dismissed the curse with a smile. Others refused to take any chances. And then there were those who insisted they had witnessed enough strange events to believe that there was something genuinely unsettling about the play. By the 19th century, theatres had changed dramatically. Stages were larger, auditoriums grander. Gaslight had begun to replace candlelight, and before long, electricity would transform theatres once again. Productions of Macbeth became more ambitious than ever before. Elaborate castles filled the stage. Thunder rolled through the auditorium. Fog drifted across the floor. Battles were fought with real steel swords. The play demanded spectacle, but spectacle often came with risk. Unlike today's carefully choreographed fight scenes, many early productions relied on practical experience and trust. Weapons were sometimes sharpened for realism. Heavy scenery was moved by hand. Flying effects depended on ropes, pulleys, and stage crews working together with perfect timing. Even a small mistake could have serious consequences. Whenever an accident occurred during a performance of Macbeth, people remembered it. If the same accident happened during Twelfth Night, or Much Ado About Nothing, it was usually forgotten. This is one of the curious things about superstition. Once people expect something to happen, they begin noticing every example that seems to prove it. Psychologists call this confirmation bias, our tendency to remember events that support what we already believe while overlooking those that do not. Of course, the actors of the 19th century didn't use that term. They simply nodded knowingly and said, "It's Macbeth." One of the earliest documented incidents often linked to the curse happened during an 18th century production. An actor was killed in a sword fight after a weapon was mistakenly used instead of a blunted stage sword. Historical records show that serious accidents involving stage combat did happen during this period. Whether this particular tragedy unfolded exactly as later storytellers describe it is less certain. Like many tales surrounding the play, fact and folklore become woven together until separating them becomes almost impossible. As the years passed, the stories multiply. A theatre fire here, a collapsing set there, performers injured during rehearsals, leading actors suddenly falling ill just before opening night, financial disasters that forced the productions to close early. None of these events alone proved a curse, but together they created a remarkable collection of coincidences. And coincidence is often where legends find their greatest strength. One particularly famous story concerns the celebrated English actor Sir John Gielgud. During a 1930 production of Macbeth, several people connected with the show died over a relatively short period. The deaths were unrelated and occurred under different circumstances. Yet, because they happened around the same production, they became linked in the public imagination. To those who already believed in the curse, it felt like confirmation. To everyone else, it was an unfortunate series of coincidences. Another production featured the legendary actor Laurence Olivier. While rehearsing Macbeth, a heavy stage weight reportedly came crashing down from the flies. It narrowly missed Olivier by only a few inches. Had he been standing slightly differently, the outcome could have been tragic. Those working backstage understood how extraordinary that near miss really was. Counterweights are incredibly heavy. They help balance scenery and lighting equipment high above the stage. When everything works properly, they are perfectly safe. But if something goes wrong, gravity takes over. Some crew members whispered that the play had claimed another victim. Only this time, it had failed. Others simply thanked their good fortune and carried on working. Perhaps the most remarkable thing about these stories is that very few of them involve anything supernatural. There are no mysterious figures appearing in empty theatres, no glowing lights, no unexplained voices echoing through the darkness. Instead, the legend is built almost entirely on ordinary events. Accidents, illness, mechanical failure, human error. The sort of thing that can happen during any theatrical production. Yet when they happen during Macbeth, they seem to carry a different weight. That is the power of storytelling. Once a narrative takes hold, every chapter feels connected to the last. It becomes less about proving whether the curse exists, and more about belonging to a tradition that stretches back hundreds of years. Many actors will happily tell you that they don't believe the play is cursed. Then, moments later, they'll quietly refer to it as the Scottish play. Not because they are afraid, because traditions matter. Theatre is one of the oldest collaborative art forms in the world. Generations of performers pass down customs, rituals, and stories that help create a sense of community. Whether those traditions are based on history or folklore often become less important than the fact that they are shared. Perhaps that's why the legend has survived for over 400 years. It isn't only a ghost story. It isn't only superstition. It's part of theatre identity. A reminder that every actor who steps onto the stage joins a tradition far older than themselves. And if those actors happen to avoid saying one particular title, there is always another name they can use. The Scottish play. Simple, respectful, and according to many performers, far less likely to tempt fate. By the middle of the 20th century, theatre had changed almost beyond recognition. Stages were brighter, lighting was more reliable, safety standards had improved dramatically, fight choreography had become carefully rehearsed. Sets were engineered with far greater precision than before. Surely, if there had ever been a curse surrounding Macbeth, modern theatres would finally put an end to it. And yet, the story continued. Not every production was troubled. Thousands of performances took place every year without incident. But every so often, something unexpected would happen. A piece of scenery would fall. An actor would become ill. A rehearsal would be interrupted by an unexpected mishap. Each new event quietly found its place among the growing collection of tales that surrounded the Scottish play. One of the most frequently discussed productions starred the American actor Charlton Heston. By the time he appeared in Macbeth, Heston was already well known for his commanding presence on screen and stage. During one performance, an accident occurred involving tights worn as part of the costume. The material caught fire from an open flame used on stage. Fortunately, the fire was extinguished before it caused serious injury. Heston later spoke about the incident with characteristic humour, but it quickly became another story added to the legend. Again, there was nothing supernatural about it. Open flames were common in theatres at the time, and costumes made from synthetic materials could ignite more easily than expected. Yet because it happened during Macbeth, many people quietly nodded and said, "Of course it did." Then there was Peter O'Toole, the celebrated Irish actor, famous for his remarkable performances on both stage and screen, also experienced unusual difficulties during productions of Shakespeare. Although not every story connected with O'Toole can be verified in detail, his name often appears whenever theatre people discuss productions that seemed unusually unlucky. Perhaps that is another feature of legends. Over time, famous names become attached to famous stories, because sometimes they truly belong there. Sometimes because the tale becomes more remarkable that way. Another story tells of a production that seemed determined never to reach opening night. One actor injured a shoulder during rehearsal. Another lost their voice. A light rig malfunctioned. Several members of the company became ill one after another. Eventually, opening night was delayed. Was it the curse? Or simply the kind of unfortunate chain of events that occasionally affect any large production? No one could say. But backstage the whispers began. Someone must have said the name. The remarkable thing about theatre is that it depends on so many people working together. Actors, stage managers, lighting technicians, sound operators, carpenters, wardrobe teams, hair and makeup artists, prop departments, fly operators, front of house staff. One unexpected problem can affect everyone. Perhaps that's why theatre people have always developed rituals. Not because rituals control fate, but because they create a sense of order in an environment where so many things can change in an instant. A pre-show warm-up, a company circle before the curtain rises, a quiet moment alone in the dressing room, checking every prop exactly the same way before each production. And yes, calling Macbeth by another name. Many performers who insist they don't believe in the curse still refuse to test it. One actor once joked, "I don't believe in ghosts either, but I still wouldn't spend the night alone in a haunted castle." It's a curious kind of logic. You don't have to believe something completely to decide it's not worth taking the risk. Perhaps that's why the tradition has survived for so long. Every new generation enters the theatre full of excitement. Sooner or later, someone accidentally says the forbidden title backstage. The room falls silent. Then comes the laughter. Someone smiles. Someone groans dramatically. And almost immediately, an older member of the company says, "Right, we'd better sort that out." Because according to tradition, there is a way to undo the mistake. A curious ritual. Part theatre, part superstition, part comedy. A ritual so well known that actors in different countries perform their own slightly different version of it. No one knows exactly where it began. No one knows who invented it, but many theatres still practice it today. If someone accidentally says Macbeth inside a theatre, they are expected to leave the building immediately. Once outside, they must turn around 3 times. Some traditions say once, others insist 3 is essential. Next, they are to spit over their left shoulder, or sometimes both shoulders, depending on which version of the story you hear. Then comes the strangest part. They must shout a swear word, or recite a line from another Shakespeare play. Finally, they knock on the theatre door, politely ask to be invited back inside. Only then, according to tradition, has the curse been broken. To an outsider, it sounds wonderfully ridiculous, and perhaps it is. Yet in theatres around the world, this little performance continues. Not because everyone believes it works, but because it reminds people that theatres has always been built on shared traditions. Some practical, some symbolic, and some simply too enjoyable to let disappear. If you've spent enough time in a theatre, you'll eventually notice something rather unusual. The people who work there are often wonderfully practical. They solve problems every single day. If a spotlight refuses to turn on, they find the fault. If a costume tears moments before curtain up, someone repairs it in minutes. If scenery becomes stuck halfway through a scene change, an entire crew quietly adapts without the audience ever knowing. Theatre people are problem solvers. They're resourceful. They're creative. They're used to thinking quickly under pressure. which makes it all the more surprising that so many of them still follow traditions that can't be explained by logic alone. Ask an actor if they believe saying Macbeth will truly bring bad luck, and you may receive a smile. Some will laugh, some will shrug. Many will simply say, "Why risk it?" The answer has become almost as famous as the superstition itself. Because whether someone believes in the curse isn't really the point. The tradition has become a sign of respect. Respect for the theatre, respect for those who came before, and respect for a community that has passed these customs from one generation to the next for hundreds of years. Imagine walking into your first professional rehearsal. You're nervous, excited. You want to make a good impression. The cast is introducing themselves. The director is explaining the schedule, and everyone is beginning to relax. Then someone casually mentions the play by its full title. Almost instantly, a few heads turn. Someone raises an eyebrow. Another actor quietly says, "We don't usually say that in here." No one is angry. No one is frightened. Instead, the newcomer has just been introduced to one of theatre's oldest traditions. It's almost like joining a family with its own private customs. Every profession has them. Sailors have their rituals before setting out to sea. Athletes develop habits before an important match. Musicians have their own pre-concert traditions. The theatre is no different. These rituals create familiarity in a world where every performance is, in some small way, unpredictable. No audience is exactly the same. No performance unfolds in precisely the same way twice. The unexpected is simply part of live theatre. Perhaps that is why traditions have always mattered. Not because they control what happens, but because they remind everyone that they are facing those uncertainties together. Psychologists have studied this idea for many years. They found that rituals, whether based on religion, culture, sport, or simple personal habit, can reduce anxiety. Repeating familiar actions gives the mind something steady to hold onto. It creates confidence, focus, a feeling of readiness. In other words, the ritual doesn't have to possess magical powers. The people performing it create the power themselves. The Macbeth tradition may work in much the same way. By avoiding the title, actors are participating in something larger than themselves. They become part of a story that stretches back more than 400 years. A story shared by Shakespeare's actors in London, community theatre volunteers in small towns, students performing for the first time, and famous performers standing beneath the lights of some of the world's greatest stages. Across continents, across centuries, the tradition survives. Of course, not everyone follows it. Some directors insist on using the proper title throughout rehearsals. Many drama schools encourage students to discuss the superstition openly without worrying about it. There are plenty of actors who happily say Macbeth backstage and think nothing of it. And often, nothing happens at all. The rehearsal goes smoothly, the performance is a success. Everyone goes home perfectly safe. Yet even then, the legend remains. Not because every production ends in disaster, but because every now and then, something unexpected happens. Perhaps a prop goes missing moments before the curtain rises, a microphone stops working without warning, costume zip breaks during a quick change, a lighting cue fails, an actor forgets a line they've spoken perfectly dozens of times before. These things happen in theatre. They always have. They always will. But if they happen during the Scottish play, someone, somewhere backstage, is almost guaranteed to smile knowingly and whisper, "I wonder who said it." The room usually fills with laughter. The tension eases. The mistake is solved. The show goes on. But that's what theatre has always done. No matter how difficult the rehearsal, no matter how many obstacles appear, no matter how strange the stories become, the curtain still rises. The audiences will still take their seats. the lights will fade, and for a few precious hours, the magic of live performance begins once again. Perhaps that is the greatest lesson hidden within the legend. Not that curses are real, not that misfortune can be summoned by a single word, but that theatre itself is built on stories. Stories performed on stage, stories shared backstage, stories whispered between generations. Some are written by playwrights, others are written by the people who dedicate their lives to bringing those plays to life. And among all those stories, few have endured quite like the tale of the Scottish play. And so, our story brings us back to where it began. The theatre is quiet once again. The audience has gone home. The dressing room lights have been switched off one by one. Costumes hang neatly on their rails, waiting patiently for tomorrow's performance. Somewhere backstage, a forgotten prop rests on a table. A stage manager's script lies closed. The smell of paint, timber, and old curtains lingers in the air. The building seems to breathe. If these walls could speak, what stories would they tell? Not only of Macbeth, but of every play that has ever graced the stage. Every standing ovation, every opening night, every forgotten line that somehow became a moment of brilliance. Every nervous performer waiting in the wings, hoping the audience would laugh or cry at exactly the right moment. Theatre has always been temporary. Unlike a painting that hangs in a gallery, or a novel that can be read again and again, a live performance exists for only a few hours. Then it becomes a memory. Perhaps that's why theatre people hold so tightly to their traditions. They are among the few things that survive from one production to the next. The sets are struck, the costumes packed away. The company moves on, the stories remain. The legend of the Scottish play has travelled across 4 centuries because each generation has chosen to pass it on. Sometimes with complete seriousness, sometimes with a grin, sometimes as a joke played on the newest member of the company, and sometimes in a quiet voice backstage just before the house opens. Today, historians generally agree that there is no evidence that Shakespeare used real witches' spells in his writing. There is no proof that witches cursed the play, nor is there convincing evidence that Macbeth experiences more accidents than any other large-scale production. In fact, many of the stories you've heard tonight have grown over time, becoming richer with every retelling. That doesn't make them worthless. Quite the opposite. Legends are not always meant to explain history. Sometimes they explain people. They tell us what communities value, what they fear, what they hope for, and how they chose to make sense of the unpredictable. Perhaps the legend of Macbeth has endured because live theatre is, by its very nature, unpredictable. No 2 performances are exactly alike. A prop can break, a cue can be missed, an actor can improvise. The audience can react in a way no one expected. Every night is unique. Every performance carries a small element of uncertainty. Maybe calling it the Scottish play is simply a gentle reminder that, despite all the planning, no one can control everything. And perhaps there is something comforting about that. Because theatre has never been about perfection. It has always been about people. People creating something together that exists only for a little while. Something fragile, something beautiful, something wonderfully alive. Long after the applause fades, those memories remain, as do the traditions. So the next time you visit a theatre or watch a performance of Shakespeare, and find yourself standing in the quiet darkness of an empty auditorium, take a moment to appreciate the generations of performers who have stood there before you. Think of the laughter, in dressing rooms, the whispered cues in the wings, the hurried scene changes, the bows at the end of the night. And somewhere, among all those memories, remember the play that many still choose not to name. Not because they know the curse is real, but because every theatre deserves its mysteries. Every old building deserves its legends. And every story deserves to be told. And so this ends our story. Don't forget to like and subscribe. If there are any theatre legends that you know of that you would like me to explore in more depth, please leave a comment down below. Thank you for spending a little time backstage with me.